Welcome to Learn Commerce PU online classes. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe our YouTube channel for all the updates.
Hello my dear students. Today we are going to the next topic, that is formal and informal communication. Communication is a process of transmitting the information or the ideas from one person to another person. That is communication. So in an organization, the communication can be the use of or communication within the organization may be broadly classified into two types, that is formal communication and informal communication. We can see in the management there is a set of organization hierarchy is there. According to that, we need to communicate within the organization, or we can use some other channels to communicate with one person to another person. So the first communication, classification of communication is the formal communication. Formal communication refers to the communication which flows from the superior to the subordinate or the official channel. This communication, formal communication, flows through official channel designed in the organization chart. So communication, this formal communication may be between the superior and subordinate, or the superior or the subordinate and the management, or subordinate and superior, or the same level, same company's employees and managers. Generally, this formal communication are recorded and filed in the office because it is designed in the organizational chart. This formal communication, it follows the hierarchy of the management. For example, it flows from the superior to the subordinate usually. So when we are communicating with another person in an organization, we need to follow some of the formal communication system. So formal communication may be further classified in two types. One is vertical communication and horizontal communication. Vertical communication refers to it flows vertically, that is upwards or downwards. So vertical communication flows vertically, it may be upward or downward. So what is upward communication? Upward communication flows from subordinate to the superior. Upward, that is what? Upward flows from the subordinate to the superior. In an organization, a superior wants to share some information with the superior or the leader of the management, then that flow of communication is called as upward communication. For example, asking a permission for the grant of leave, or else submitting or else some other informations, say taking the instructions from the subordinate. These are considered upward communication. Submitting the assignment, submitting the completed project detail or project report to the higher level, that is considered upward. So flows from subordinate to the superior, that is called as upward communication. And downward communication, it is a second type under vertical communication. So downward communication in the sense superior giving the instruction. The communication flows from the superior to the subordinate. For example, giving an order to attend the meeting, or else giving the order to complete the task within this particular date. So giving these orders from the superior to the subordinate. So this flow of communication is called as downward communication. So it is vertical. So vertical communication flows vertically, it may be downward or upward. Horizontal communication flows horizontally between one department and another department. For example, production department manager wants to communicate or wants to contact with the marketing department to discuss about some of the quality of the product, to discuss about the quality of the product or about the market criteria and all. So that flow of communication is called horizontal communication. So in the formal communication, there are number of communication networks are used. Some of the popular networks, communication networks are single chain communication network. Here communication is flows or exists between a superior and his subordinate. So communication is exist between superior and subordinates. It may be see like this. In a single chain, A, B, C, D, in a single network, in a single chain, they can each subordinate or superior can communicate with the one another. So A communicates with B, B to C, C to D, like this. Here, the chain of communication may be the communication line may be up or down the line. Say here D, from D information, D can communicate with the C or B or A like this, up or down the line. Communication may takes place in a single chain, that is single chain, exists between superior and his subordinate. That is single chain network or communication network. Next one is wheel. Here communication is exists between superior and subordinates. Here leader is act as a main controller. Here leader is in the middle of the wheel. He is act as a hub of the wheel. Superior act as a hub of the wheel. Through him only others can communicate. Here subordinates are not allowed to communicate with each other. B or C or D or E can communicate with the A only because he is the superior. Through his only communication takes place. So here A or the superior acts as a hub of the wheel. So the next one, circular. The communication here, communication is moves in a circle. Communication is moves in a circle. So any individual can communicate with another person, like individual can communicate with this adjoining two person. For example, here A can communicate with the E and B. Same way B can communicate with the A and C. So totally communication is in a circle. Communication is flows in a circle. Anybody can communicate with his adjoining two persons only. Say here D can communicate only with the E and C. He is not possible to communicate with the B because he is not an adjoining partner. Okay, so that is circular. Free flow communication network. Here any individual can communicate with any person freely because there is no restrictions. All are allowed to communicate with any person freely. Here A can communicate with B or B can communicate with the C or C can communicate with the A, relates to the organizational matter and all. So there is no restriction here. Communication may be delivered in a fast way. So need not wait for any person for the communication process and all. So A can communicate with the C, B, or freely they can communicate with each other. In inverted V, it is the fifth popular communication network under formal communication. Inverted V. Here communication is flows between superior and his subordinates and his immediate superior. Subordinates can communicate with his superior and superior, that is boss of the immediate boss. Here for example, lower operation level worker can communicate with the operational level supervisor, and if it is required, he can communicate with the next higher level within the organization. So subordinate can communicate with his superior, and if it is required or need to communicate with to a subordinate to communicate with his immediate superior. So inverted V, as per the inverted V, a subordinate can communicate with the superior and a superior if it is required. That is what? Boss of the immediate boss. So these all are the different communication networks which are used in formal communication. So formal communication is flows according to the, or it is designed or designed in the organization chart. It is flows formally between superior and subordinate. So this is about formal communication. Let's discuss the next types of communication, informal communication. So informal communication takes place between the person without following the formal line of communication, wherein formal communication refers to the communication takes place between persons by following the official channel which is designed in the organization chart. They need to follow the formal lines of communication, but here without following the formal communication takes place within the organization. This informal communication, also known as grapevine communication, because its branches spreads throughout the organization and its branches going out in, it spreads throughout the organization and its branches going out in all direction. That is why it is called, informal communication is called as grapevine communication. So in an organization, this informal communication arises out of needs of human beings. Sometimes human individuals within the organization want to share their personal information or their personal feelings with another person. It is not possible in case of formal communication is exist within the organization. So to communicate freely with another person, to share some of personal feelings or some kind of other information with another person, individual need to follow this kind of informal communication within the organization. For example, a worker chit-chatting with the other employee or other worker about the family, about his or her family matters, or about the behavior of the superior sometimes, or discussing about some of the rumors. So within the organization or outside the organization. So these all are considered as informal communication. So informal communication, also known as grapevine communication, because it spreads throughout the organization. Its branches are going out in every direction. That's why it is called as grapevine communication. Some of the, in an organization, different types of grapevine communications are there. The first one is single strand network. These are all the popular communication network which are under the informal communication or grapevine network, grapevine communication. Single strand network, here each person communicate with the another person in a sequence. Here one person communicate with the another person and he go and communicate with the another person and they go and communicate with the some other person. So here communication is traveling from one person to another. That is single strand network. It is also informal communication. Here formal lines of authority is not following A after B, B after C, not like that. Here in a sequence this communication is flows. So one person communicate with one and he may go to communicate with another person, share his that particular person, that particular information, and this message is or the communication is traveling from one person to another person. That is single strand network. Gossip network. Here each person can communicate with the another person on non-selective base. Here A is the superior or A is the individual. He can communicate with B, or A can communicate with D, C or E, like that. Non-selective base. An individual can communicate with any person on non-selective base, that is gossip network. Probability network. Here individual can communicate randomly. Okay, randomly. Here A person can, here there is no restriction. A person should communicate with B only, or B can communicate with C only, not like that. An individual can communicate with A or C or E. He can select the person randomly and he can share his information or feelings within the organization. That is probability network. Individual communicates with another person on a random basis. So he can select any one or any two to share his feelings or share some information. Okay. So the next one is cluster network. Cluster network here, cluster network, according to this cluster network communication, an individual can communicate only with the person whom he trusts. Here in an organization, there are a number of workers are working, but a person have trust with only few people, only few individuals. So he can communicate with them only. That is cluster network. A can communicate with B or C or D, or A can communicate only with the B and C, like that. That is whom he trusts. With him only he can communicate, or he can share his feelings, or he can share his information. That is cluster network. In an organization, this cluster network is a very popular communication network. According to this, a person can communicate only with whom he trusts. So these are all the communication networks or different types of communication network under grapevine communication.